Ladies and gentlemen, it's finally time for episode number 1 of our new Burn Your Boats podcast. In this inaugural episode, we outline why we call the podcast Burn Your Boats and why that's important to us. We discuss why so many who thrive and succeed are constantly making themselves uncomfortable, pivoting, testing, discarding, and digging deeper into what works. Why do so many of us do our best work when our backs are against the wall, with no way forward other than success, and where failure is not a viable option? There's a lot of meat and potatoes in here, so let's get right into it. This is our first podcast, so we hope you enjoy it. And remember, please give us a break as we burn our boats and improve every single week.
Welcome to Burn Your Boats podcast. Burn the boats is an often used metaphor for a positive change in direction and moving forward in the face of adversity. To burn your boats is to build a new reality, not using the tools, people, or existing behaviors holding you back from your life's real dreams and ambitions. As real estate investors, having interviewed thousands of successful professionals from all walks of life, Clark and David have identified freedom from financial anxiety as a top priority for many. There is a path to crafting this new life you seek. It starts with thinking differently, learning new skills, and how to say no. Let's elevate your vision of a wealthy financial future where you live life in control of your time and energy. Achieving financial freedom is often a choice, and for most, we must exit our comfort zone and burn our boats to achieve it. This podcast strives to identify pivotal moments and milestones in life that will help set you in a new direction, where future you will look back and recognize the moment everything changed.
All right, Clark. So, welcome to episode 1, day 1, minute 1
hour one
of Burn Your Boats podcast.
Yeah, I'm excited. I want to let's get this thing started, David.
Well, I think it's important to get across right off the top why we call this podcast Burn Your Boats, and then we'll talk about who we are and why. But what does the podcast Burn Your Boats mean?
Yeah. And I think that what we're going to want to do throughout this podcast is really get a feel from lots of successful people, and we'd like to think ourselves as successful as what Burn Your Boats means. How did that happen for you? How that's impacted your life, and what that looks like going forward. So, David, tell us a little bit about the background. A lot of people may not know what Burn Your Boats actually means, the story behind it. So, go ahead and tell our listeners here what that actually means, the background.
Okay, well, it's a real story. It is history. In 1519, Herman Cortez, a infamous Spanish conquistador, took his small army to Veracruz.
Okay.
And to raid the Aztec Empire. And the Aztec Empire has a lot of gold and a lot of treasure that the Spanish conquistadors are trying to accumulate. And this treasure has been defended for 600 years. And so this is a risky business going over there. He takes his army onto the shore. They stand ready to fight. He asks his army to turn around and look at the boats behind him. And at that moment, Herman Cortez shouts out, "Burn the boats." The army look at each other in dismay, and at that point realize they have reached a point of no return. They can't go back, they can't turn around, they can't go home. And at that point, they go and they fight a much larger army of the Aztecs. And not only did they capture the gold, the treasure, but they actually captured the Aztec Empire.
Yeah.
In its entirety.
Yeah.
And so what is the mentality behind that point of no return? What does that mean, burn your boats? It means we need to take decisive action, and you don't have a retreat possible. You can only go forward.
Right.
And we have found in our lives, and we have found in the success of other people, Yet when you take that burn your boats mentality and no retreat, forward only motion, that therein is the mindset of success.
Yep.
And that is why we've called this podcast Burn Your Boats, because there is no going back, there's no retreat, and it requires decisive decision making and action taking. And from there, we can talk about what we're going to deal with in this podcast, which is how to create meaningful action steps in your life where you can grow your income, you can grow your wealth, and you can grow your cash flow to the point where you can live a financially free life. And we're going to bring a lot of cool people into this conversation to have that chat.
And I think that the cool thing about what you've just said is that Burn Your Boats applies to so many people. I would like to say it applies to everyone. And it's not even just like a financial thing, right? It could be burn your boats to create a better health journey. It could be burn your boats to be able to create better relationships within your personal life. So, I think it's good for our listeners to understand that it's not just about more cash flow in terms of business. I think it's going to be centered around a lot of that because both you and I are very passionate about that, right? But also I want people to know that this is not just like a financial podcast per se, although I think that a lot of times we would agree that if you are able to be financially free, it's a lot easier to maybe be healthier. It's a lot easier to be not under so much stress so that you can actually have better relationships with the folks around you, with your family, your friends, your spouses, things of that nature. So the cool thing about Burn Your Boats is that we can look at it from many different aspects. We're going to probably focus more on the financial, which then leads to more real estate because that's our backgrounds. But ultimately, I'm excited to be able to hopefully hit home is that burning your boats means so many things to so many different people. And we're going to be able to talk to a lot of those people and hear those successful stories. And hopefully you're going to be able to, really reach out and say, that sounds like my situation, right? So that's what we're here to talk about, David.
That's right. And so with that being said, why don't we talk a little bit about what Burn Your Boats means to you? Give me examples of in your life.
Sure.
When you have taken a Burn Your Boats decision that has massively impacted your life. And I'm happy to, do the same. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Clark, and a little bit about why that story means so much to you to the point where we named this podcast after it.
Yeah, I'm an avid listener to many podcasts. I listen to so many podcasts, and I want to try and take things away from it. But one of my challenges is that the people that are behind the mics, right? Who are they? Do they really have the credibility to speak on a particular topic? Because now everyone has a podcast, right? You almost seem like you could find millions of podcasts, I'm sure. So I want to make sure that our time is so valuable. It's the most valuable thing we have right now is time and our attention to a certain thing. So if I'm going to put my time into a podcast, who the hell am I listening to? Why should I listen to them? And that was one of the first questions I asked myself when we started this podcast today. So in terms of, to answer your question about burning my own boats, I've burned many boats. I'm continuing to burn. We're burning boats right now by having this podcast, right?
That's right.
It's the ability to say, why would anyone listen to us, David? Like who's going to listen to us? So I'll give you an example of a quick burn my boats kind of situation. It's easy to look back and say, well, I have a W-2 job, right? And we'll probably go into many stories throughout the episodes of different points where we burned our boats. I think one of the biggest boat burning experiences that a lot of us have that I call it like head trash, right? Where it's like, no, I would do this, but I can't because I'm going to lose security. So probably the first one that comes to mind is me quitting my W-2 sales job. I made good money. I was financially secure. And I decided that ultimately I knew that I was in sales and I could only make so many sales in a day. I could only, visit so many households in a day. There's only 10 hours, 8 hours in a working day. And I didn't want to work at 10 o'clock at night, and no one wanted to have me in their home at 10 o'clock at night. So just a quick background is that I worked for a kind of home improvement company in the Panhandle of Florida, and I would go to a 10 o'clock appointment to meet Mrs. Jones to talk to her about windows or doors or hurricane shutters, what she wanted to buy, right? So I could only do so many of those, and I made good money, but I noticed I kept bumping my head against the ceiling. And that was a bit frustrating for me because no matter how good I was, I couldn't sell 6 appointments when there wasn't enough time in the day. So I kind of got comfortable, right? And that's always kind of like a red flag to me. It's like the light that's like going around saying you're comfortable, and that started to bother me. And I'm like, why? I'm just so comfortable, which means you tend to get lazy. You tend to get lackadaisical. And I didn't like that at all. And I'm like, the lazier I get, the less I want to go out and be better. The less I want to go out and make more money because I'm just secure. And at that point, I remember I was at like a home show, right? So they have them on the weekends. You'd go in. It was a home improvement company, and there'd be all the competitors.
Like an
and
exhibition.
An exhibition, right? It's always at like the arena where they play the basketball and things like that, right? And I remember looking around, and you start to know the people, your competitors. You kind of become quasi acquaintances, and you talk to them. And I noticed that everyone that I would see, I was probably 30 at the point, maybe like late 20s. And everyone was in their like 40s, 50s, 60s. They had worked for all the competitors, right? So they knew all the products, they knew all the people that worked there. And they were always complaining, oh, my company doesn't pay me enough, or, our prices are too high. They were always complaining about something, but they never did anything about it. But they made enough money to where they felt secure. They didn't make too much money, right? And I remember at that point sitting there on a Saturday looking around, I was like, I don't want to be that guy complaining about my job at 48 because in their mind, they could never do another industry, right? Because in their mind, they had this solo focus that they were only going to sell windows and doors and additions on rooms and things like that because that's what they knew. And if they were going to make an upgrade in their life, it was just going to the next company that did it slightly better. And I was like, I don't want to do that at all. And so I remember at that point, I was like, I'm going to start looking for something where I can control my own destiny. And that's what led me to real estate. And so I basically found a real estate franchise that kind of gave me the roadmap. It's kind of like if you were going to start a sandwich shop and you were going to buy a Subway, right? I don't know how to make sub sandwiches, but I'm pretty sure Subway does. And they kind of give you the push in the right direction. And so that's what I did. I bought it. I stayed on with my company for about 5 or 6 months consulting to kind of bridge that gap where I wasn't making any money. And then I quit on very good terms with my old company. And I never looked back. I don't regret it for a second. And that instance is the little that I know at that time. I've got a picture of myself in 2014, like signing the paperwork for the real estate franchise. And I had no idea at that time that was going to lead to so many new opportunities that I never would have had if I didn't burn my boats, if I didn't take the chance, if I had the realization that I was too damn comfortable. And when you're too comfortable and you're just going through this like methodical daily routine, and the only thing that you can do is just work harder to make more money, I was like, I don't want to do that, right? So that's just one. That was probably the biggest example that's led me to where I'm at today, is to be able to burn my boats through getting out of the comfort zone. And I was in a commission-only job, so I was still like, I controlled, like the more I sold, the more I made, right? So the better my skills got, the more I made. But ultimately, I was controlled by the amount of leads that my company gave me. What if we hired new salespeople? That would impact things. And I was always going to hit a very low ceiling. So that's probably the biggest change in my life. And there have been many since, and there were many before, but that was the thing that really changed my mindset. And, I burned my boats.
Right.
So,
I think it's really important. I think you used the word comfort there many, many
yeah,
times. As in life, we find, I think it's human nature to find ourselves and get ourselves into comfort, into order. I talk about
yeah,
the concept of entropy, and we will
right,
continue to talk about that quite a bit here. The constant evolution of order to disorder, and so the human brain, our human nature, is to get ourselves into a position of order. You might find a girlfriend that you like, you want to move in
right,
with her, and everything is in order. You've got a nice, comfortable house. You're renting a
right,
nice one-bedroom apartment with your girlfriend. You've got a convenient job in the home sales
yep,
world, right? That's you've created order, and in order to move on or elevate yourself at all, you have to forcibly blow that up and burn your boats to get out of that situation. And I think every human being is faced with that quite a bit. And there's numerous times where you're going to come to a crossroads in your life, and there's you've got the good wolf and the bad wolf.
right,
You've got the good wolf saying everything's cool right
yeah,
now, don't mess it up. You've worked very hard to create this order in your
right,
life, and then you've got that's the good wolf telling you, be cool, sit back. You're a Cheshire cat. You're a
right,
Cheshire cat. Enjoy that, right? But then you've got, let's say in this case, the bad wolf. And bad wolf's on the other side of your shoulders telling you, burn it. In your heart of hearts, it's stirring inside your soul. You can feel it, that now is the time you need to change your job. You might also need to change your girlfriend. You
Right.
might also need to change many aspects of
Your
your
friends,
life,
your network. Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
And so burn the boats is way deeper when you get into, you should always be in a state of discomfort,
Yeah.
always throughout all of your life. And if you are actively sitting in a position with you're in an unhappy relationship, you're in an unhappy friendship, you're in an unhappy job, you're in an unhappy income stream. You might have. I relate a lot to legs on a stool. You have got like three main legs on that stool. You've got your health, you've got your relationships, and you've got your income. And to have entire order, I think it's important that all three of those at the same time
Right.
are functioning well. They're all in a state of order. And to purposefully go in and kick one of those legs out is not within our human nature. Yeah, our human nature is to stay within order. And so I think that's a really powerful story, as many of us can relate to that, this was a time you did it. But I think where I want to move on from the point of that was a burn the boats moment.
Right.
But I also think that you need to do that almost consistently and constantly throughout your life, is always be looking at your life and say, is this what I want?
Right.
Is this the highest and best use of my time or my friendship or my precious energy?
Yeah.
And so, I could give you a number of examples of me burning my boats. Both of us are sitting here in Florida right now having a conversation, and where I live, where you live, how I live, and how you live, and the success that we've had in our lives. A number of people over the years have visited my house, family. I'm Irish. I'm from Dublin. Would come over and they'd see my lifestyle and they'd see how I live and where I live, and they were like, "Oh my God, you're so lucky." I'm like, "Luck has
I hate that. I hate when people say that. You're so lucky.
look. There is luck involved. I'm healthy.
Yeah. Right.
That's number one. If you have your health, that's so super important. And we're going to talk a lot about that during this podcast.
But to interject really quickly is that whenever I hear, I hate that phrase, "you're so lucky," but I love the phrase, is that the harder you work, the luckier you get. The harder you work, the more times you put yourself in opportunities to become lucky, right?
That's right.
And instead of, and that in itself is appeals to health, to relationships, to business, to whatever it is that you want to be. And so when I hear, "Oh, you're so lucky," like, yeah, you caught some lucky breaks in times where you bought the house at the right time, but you also were in times where you bought the house at the wrong time. No one ever talks about, "Oh, you weren't very lucky then," right? They only see the good thing, right? And that's the world that we live in with social media and everyone putting the filter on. So tell us a little bit more about where your aha burn your boats moment was, because I do think that it's important for the listeners to understand where we got to where we're at and where we're constantly. You said you constantly need to be burning your boats. Again, this right here, like right now, like we do real estate full time. We could be sitting here right now on a laptop trying to find the next best deal to flip or the next apartment complex to buy, right? But we're not, right? And so we are this episode right here, we are physically burning our own boats because we're not out looking for that next deal, because maybe there's a bigger path for us in our own lives and our company together. And that's exciting that we are living proof right now that we're burning our own boats just by being here recording this episode. So tell us a little bit about maybe the biggest moment where you burned your boats and what led you to come to this table right now.
Okay, that was really good. You're talking about the points of leverage, but to answer your question, I have an interesting thought experiment that I enjoy doing with people, and it goes a little bit like this: like if I put your brain right now, in your case, you're 40
yep.
40 years of age. I'm 52. If I put my 52-year-old brain in my 22-year-old body, with everything I know, every single thing I know, every decision I ever made, everywhere I ever went, everything I know. And I said, could you get yourself back to this seat at this time, recording this podcast with you in this environment right now? Could I make my way back to here?
Yeah.
And it's a very interesting thought experiment. It's like I have all the information,
right?
But this is where the luck comes into it, right? There is an element of, I walked into that, meetup one night and I met Brian, and Brian introduced me to, Derek and so on and so forth. And that's how I met you.
Right.
Or I walked into a bar one night and I met my future wife, or I walked to a, there's a
Yeah.
there's a number of scenarios that you would have to be there right there at that
Right.
moment with the people that you were with to walk into that environment that you were in. And so I think that that's really interesting that there is an element of luck.
You didn't meet Brian at that networking event if you were sitting at home
That's
watching Netflix. So I do know, which goes back to the harder you work, the luckier you get, right? You may have went to that network and did meet Brian, the networking event, and you met no one and you just went home. But did you meet Brian? It's because you took the action,
That's right.
because you stepped outside of your, maybe you didn't know anyone at that networking. You walk in there, you get your wristband, and you know no one. And we all have been there. It's super awkward. It's like going to that high school dance when you first walk in and everyone's standing there in their corner with who they know, and maybe you don't know anyone. But forcing yourself to get out of that, your comfort level, meet Brian, who then introduced you to that person, and 5 years later, you can trace it all the way back to that one networking event. No one's ever said that when they sat at home and watched Netflix.
No, that's exactly right. They've seen that show. In fact, just as you're saying that right now, it's like recording this podcast. This is our very first podcast. I've recorded podcasts with a lot of other people. I've been on other people's podcasts, but recording this podcast right now is one of those moments. Like
Yeah.
we, as you say, we could be at home buying deals right
Right.
now that are absolutely guaranteed to make us money. And here we are.
A lot more
recording-
money.
A lot more money
Today,
than,
it will.
than this podcast is going to be. But we don't know where this podcast is going to go.
Right.
We don't know the cool, amazing people that we're going to meet.
Yep.
We don't, we're going to talk a little bit later on in this podcast today about what it is that we're trying to create. But to get back to, those burn your boats moments and what led to me being here, there are fundamental, crossroads that I can point to. I think one of them was, after I left university, I worked in small construction companies, and I enjoyed it. It was, well, I didn't enjoy it. It paid the bills. It did this. It did that, and I recall just making a decision one day that I didn't enjoy it. I'd been doing it for a number of years. I was really well paid in my early 20s.
Was it one day, or was it just like an organic over a period of time where you just kept getting stepped on? You're like, hey, this isn't for me, or was there like a specific event that may have happened?
Well, I could point to really two. There was one, it was just a fundamental decision where I said, I'm going to, I was in a meeting on a Monday morning, and I had been in this meeting, every Monday morning for 2 years previously. The same meeting,
Right.
the same updates with the same people, and, highly paid. And I stood up one Monday morning, and this had been brewing for a while. He said, look, guys, I'm going to give you the same report, with some minor tweaks that I gave you last Monday. But I really just can't do this anymore. I'm just not interested. I'm not engaged. I'm not enjoying anything. I was a
So
really,
you actually said that?
yeah, completely.
I
And
love
but
that.
I recall driving home from that appointment, that meeting, that Monday morning meeting at like 2 hours later. I left effective immediately, just so
Yeah.
you know. I recall driving home, and I made two fundamental decisions that I look back at now, that have changed my life completely. On my drive, in that, like, whatever it was, like that 38-minute commute back to my house. And number one was, I'm going to drive home today. I'm going to delete my resume from my computer, and then I'm going to go into my trash can. This is back when there was a trash can
Right.
on your Microsoft Windows 95.
Right.
And I'm going to delete it from my trash can, and then I'm going to go into my emails, and every time I've sent it, I'm going to delete it from there too,
Yeah.
so that I would not be able to retrieve it,
Right.
no matter what.
Yeah.
There's a fundamental burn your boats.
That-
For me to go back, I'd have to recreate and
Right.
redo my resume. And so that was decision number one. I am never going to work for somebody again.
So before you go to number two, in that moment, because that's scary as shit, right? That for a lot of people that are listening that maybe want to do that, how did that feel? Did that feel invigorating? Were you fearful? Like what at that moment where you're like, oh shit?
Oh,
This
it's an
is
empty
really-
void.
Yeah.
Oh, it's an empty void of fear. Of course, absolutely. There's a concept when you make this decision. It's like, well, okay, what now?
Right.
But simultaneously, I made another decision at exactly the same time. I got to go home. I got to delete my resume
Right.
as I've just gone through. But I'm also never going to commute ever again in my life.
Okay.
I'm never, ever going to commute to anything ever again. So I defined the fact that I was going to work for anybody, but I also defined the fact that I'm not driving to anything either.
Right.
And this is in early 2000s. And so this is before work from home was a thing. The
Right.
internet was there.
Yeah.
Internet was out there. But like I'm never working for anybody, and I'm never driving ever again. Monday through Friday, 7 in the morning. I'm never getting up, and I'm never going to do that
So
again.
you were cool before it was cool, right? To work remote.
I don't know if I'm
You,
cool. I don't know
you were a
if
trailblazer, whether you know it or not.
I'm not so sure I go down that road, but it is the power of decision making. So, you asked a great question, like what did it feel like then?
Right.
What was the next step? And the next step was, sitting around for 3-4 weeks. I think anybody who's successful in this world is naturally motivated. They're naturally urgent. They feel a deep sense of get up no matter what,
Right.
figure it out, get up at 6, go for a run, get to your desk for 9 and figure it out. And it's amazing human ingenuity from there on out, So for me, in that particular case, I said, you know what, this is a bygone business model, but I could see that there was a big demand for internet. That people didn't have internet on their computers,
Right.
or they didn't have internet
On
on
their
their
phones.
phones. They didn't have it on their watches. They didn't have it on their smart clothing at the time. It wasn't everywhere, and yet a lot of people needed access to internet. So I built out a bunch of internet cafes that were all cash.
So before we move to that point, because I know that like if I always want to put myself in the position of the listener, right? And so I heard this story that's so cool that you've literally, like, I didn't physically burn my boats per se. You physically burned your resume, right? Like in essence, right? To where it's like there's no going back, right? I still probably had my resume somewhere, even though I never actually worked for like a big corporation, so I never updated my resume after college. But what if I'm a listener and I'm listening to you and saying, that's cool that you did that. I want to do that. But there's the big underlying thing that we don't talk about and you don't hear about as a lot is like finances, right? Well, what if you burn your boat and you have $0 in your bank account and you can't afford to do that, right? So talk to me maybe a little bit about, let's go back 3 or 4 months before you hit the delete button on your resume. Did you set yourself up financially? Did you squirrel away some more money? Were you in a relationship where maybe your girlfriend could pay the rent for a couple months while you're trying to figure it all out? Talk to me a little bit before we just move on to, well, you set up this next thing. How did you set yourself up mentally and maybe physically in terms of financial? Because I know that's how we're looking at things right now, maybe looking to pivot into different parts of real estate and business and things like that, is that I still have to pay rent. Your landlord doesn't care whether you're burning boats and killing resumes off, right? So talk to me a little bit about what was going through your head maybe leading up to that and how long of maybe runway you had before you were going to be out in the street holding a sign, with a cup asking for money.
It's funny, just as you're asking me that question, I hadn't thought about, going back to this story either, but I realized it was a burn the boats moment before that too. I was living in New York City for, 8 years in a relationship, reasonably happy with how I was going, but I just, me and New York City at that time, I didn't know how to engage with it per se. I think New York City is one of those cities that you either love it or you hate it,
Right.
and it's great to visit for the weekend.
Yeah.
But if you live there, you better live there for a reason.
Right.
It's hard to live in New York City if you're a house painter.
Right.
It's easy to be there if you're a TV anchor.
Yeah,
So
right.
that's your purpose for being there, for being in finance. But again, I recall walking down a street in New York a few hours after this event. I was at my front door and I just bought myself a new pair of shoes previously that weekend, and it was winter, and I was locking the door at my front door, and I started slipping like in a cartoon slip. Like,
Right.
we're talking about full sound effects.
Your feet are all the way up in the air.
Full on,
Yeah.
full on, everything about it. And
You're lucky that it wasn't in today's age where someone would have caught that on their camera and it's like a meme somewhere, right? So
that's right. And so I had fallen
Yeah.
on my coccyx, and it was one of those moments where I stretched out. I was like, "Oh my goodness! Like, do my fingers
Right,
work?
right.
Have I just broken my back? Do my toes?" So I wiggled my toes first, wiggled my fingers first, and I'm lying on my back, and just like I'd never experienced 8 times before I'd experienced New York winters, but this was the one that
That
got
was the
me.
one. That was the one that broke your back.
This
right?
is the one that broke my
the camel
back.
that broke the camel's back.
And so a week or two later, so that stuck with me.
Yeah.
I was like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
I was in an okay relationship. I was in a good job, but in a city it wasn't chiming with me.
It sounds like there's a lot of comfort. Your
lot.
relationship was okay, but it wasn't horrible, right? Your
Yeah.
job was good, but it wasn't great.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people that would just stay in that, and just kind of put up with it. Yeah, it could be worse, right?
Right.
It could be worse.
And so a couple of weeks later, I'm sitting there on a Saturday morning, and I pick up the book The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. and I read that in one sitting,
Wow.
start to finish, right? Like, pick it up, and I'm not putting this thing down.
Yeah.
I'm reading it until I'm not stopping
Right.
till I got what this story is all about. And that story led me to making a profound decision that moment. I was like, I'm done. If anybody knows the story of The Alchemist, it's a story of a young boy who goes out and ventures the world looking for his proverbial treasure, and
Yep.
travels throughout the Moroccan and Algerian and Egyptian deserts from Andalusia in Spain. And he's a shepherd boy, does all of this travel to go look for his gold, look for his treasure, and he doesn't find it. And he goes back home and he finds that the treasure was always there in the first place. And so that meant a lot to me, in that, like, where at that point in time, like, where was my treasure?
Right.
And it certainly wasn't there. And I knew it wasn't in New York for me. And so that stuck with me. Reading that book, I would say I was walking down the road in New York about 7-8 days later,
Yep.
and as rash and cavalier, maybe as this story is going to sound for the next 10 seconds, I'm walking down the street, and I've got The Alchemist ringing in my brain. I've got the falling on my
Falling on
butt,
your ass. Yep.
recently hitting me. And I'm walking down the street, and there's like fire engines and ambulances screaming down the street. And I stopped in my tracks. I literally stopped in my tracks. And then I'm not going to. And I was on my way to work. Like, I'm not going. I'm not going. I'm going to go home. I'm going to pack my stuff. I'm going to book I'm from Ireland. This is
Yeah.
in New York. I'm going to book a flight to New York tonight, or to Dublin tonight. And I did.
Yeah.
I went home. I packed a little bag and got on a flight. Left a note for my poor girlfriend at the time. I don't feel great about that, but
Wait, hold on. You didn't tell her that
she was in work.
Oh, she was at work, so you just left a note?
I just left a note saying I'm gone. I'm gone to Ireland.
Oh.
But I needed that because I wanted to go home and kind of spend some time and figure it out.
Yeah.
And little did I know it at that time, I never went back to New York.
Right.
That was it.
Yeah.
I left all my stuff there, and I
Really?
never went back.
Wow.
But it was just screaming at me. This
Yeah.
was a burn the boats moment. This was
Right.
like, no, you've got to do it. And that was a tough decision. Like,
Of course it was.
The easy decision was, and I was highly paid
Yeah.
for a guy in his mid to late 20s. I was making $160,000-$170,000 a year.
Right.
This is in the late 90s.
Yeah.
I was doing well.
That's about $1 million with today's inflation, right?
I had money, put it
Yeah.
that way. So it wasn't financial. Like, if it was pure financial, I should have stayed.
Right.
I was in a relationship that was probably hurtling towards marriage and all
Yeah.
of that kind of stuff. But I knew there was something fundamentally wrong with that picture.
Right.
And so that was a burn your boats moment. So
Yeah.
I'm just giving you two
Yeah, those
big
are-
burn your
I love
boats
those.
moments.
The fact that you left a note for your girlfriend, and I'm assuming that you guys didn't make it past the note, or did you guys stay together afterwards?
Oh no, we
That was it?
that obviously, you're throwing a grenade into the middle of your life at that
Yeah.
point when you go home and leave a note. You go back to Ireland in this
Right.
case, you leave a note. Sure, there was negotiations to be had, and
Right.
things like that, but
Negotiations.
But equally, it is, you have to be decisive in life. If I know a lot of people that are plodding along in jobs they don't like, in relationships they don't like, in towns they don't like,
Right.
in villages they don't like, in countries they don't like. There's so many people who are unable to make
Right.
fundamental decisions that impact them, and so you don't get permission from your current girlfriend
Right.
to leave her. You don't get permission from your boss. Walk in today and just say, you know what, I'm going to just go. They're going to convince you to stay. The
Right.
world wants you to stay where you are.
And you bring up a good point, and I think that's something that we all struggle with, is life is never going to tap you on your shoulder and say, David, by the way, this is the perfect time to burn your boats, right? This is the perfect time to break up with your girlfriend because you're comfortable, but you're getting too comfortable. Life is never going to tap you on the shoulder and tell you the perfect. It's like, I don't have any kids, right? And so a lot of times I'll ask, well, when's the right time to have kids? And 10 times out of 10, right? Every person says, there's no right time to have kids, right? No one says that you're the perfect point in the amount of time you have and the job that you have and the money that you make and where your spouse is at in their life. There's no perfect time to have kids, right? You just have the kid and you deal with it, right? And I think that what we're kind of alluding to is the same thing. And I think one of we really want to be able to provide actionable steps to, if you're thinking about burn your boats, what's the best way to go about it, and what's the best way to set yourself up for success and minimize the risk when you actually do delete your resume on your email and throw it in the trash can and leave that note with your girlfriend and just leave. So I think that one of the big parts of this podcast is to be able to provide listeners with ideas, with tips, to be able to start setting yourself up for success and setting yourself up to become less fearful when you actually do delete your resume, right? And so you kind of always hear the stories, the sexy stories where it's like, oh, I was doing this and I quit my job and I started Facebook the next day, and that's the story you hear, right? But you never hear the many stories where you were able to start a company that maybe was not successful and then it kind of organically grew. But that's not sexy, right? And so you hear the stories, but you don't hear all the things behind Mark Zuckerberg starting Facebook. It's not like he just went from being a college kid and all of a sudden Facebook was Facebook, right? So the exciting thing is that we can talk to people that are in different stages of their life, that are in different financial parts of their life. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it all comes down to mindset, right? It all comes down to, I don't care whether you work at McDonald's or you're a very successful neurosurgeon, right? At the end of the day, that neurosurgeon may be just as unhappy doing his work and working Saturdays and being on call is the guy flipping burgers, right? It's like, but they're fearful that what happened, they know that burger flipping job is going to be there the next day. The neurosurgeon knows that he's going to be able to have more patients to work on in the future. But if you're not happy and you want more out of life, then what do you do and how do you confront those fears? And so we want to be able to provide a way to help push you in the right direction. And it's going to be through stories like you just provided, through our own experiences, through guests that we have. And I will be as much a listener of this podcast as I will be a host. And selfishly, I think that we know that we want to be able to provide as much value to people that are on the fence about where they want to go in life, right? And being able to provide them with ways to attack that. But I'm going to be on the other side of the mic too, listening and being selfishly like, the guests that we interview in these future episodes is I'm going to be taking notes along with every other listener. So that's something that really excites me about this. But I had to burn my boats to do that, and that's kind of what brings us right now.
Yeah, and I think that's brilliant. I think we've been talking about just what the concept of
Right.
burn your boats might be. There is what we're trying to provide here is we're trying to provide an insight into the different stages maybe
Yeah.
of what brings success in life. And you have to be decisive in life to be successful. I
Yep.
think that's if you take the considerations of everybody in the world and everybody who expects anything off you into consideration every single time with every single decision that you're going to make, you're going to end up compromising. You're going to end up with a compromised
Yeah.
outcome. And what this podcast fundamentally is going to be about is there are a number of stages. So there's really three categories of people that we're going to be talking to in this podcast. So let's have a
Sure.
a chat about that. So most folks in their 20s. There's going to be exceptions to everything. There's a standard deviation to everything. But most folks in their 20s are coming out of either college or they haven't been to school or university, and they get going on their careers. And they start to make a little bit of money. They start getting into relationships. They start moving in with their boyfriends or girlfriends, okay? And that's a cohort. We're going to call them like 20, let's say 20 years of age to maybe 31, 32 years of age. And they're the people, you're in learning mode. You're trying to figure out, what does the future hold? You're making some decisions here, you're making some decisions there. The next cohort, so that's like, we really put those into, the beginner category, if you will.
Right.
But then in order to get to stage 2 or level 2. Level 2 for us is people who have small businesses, or they achieve a certain level of success in their lives, and they feel that they achieve a certain level of success that was success for them when they were in level 1. So level 1, you need to break out of level 1 to get to level 2, right? And so in level 2, you get comfortable. You start achieving some of your early goals. But you now can see a much further horizon,
Right.
and you can get further. You know,
Yeah.
you can do more. But you've learned enough now to know that I have to make big decisions. I have to move quicker. I have to move with more urgency. Um, and I have to commit myself to scary things if
Yeah.
I want to get to level 3. Level 3 is what you would consider highly successful people. Um, that they on the outside have achieved incredible things in their lives. We meet these people all the time
Right.
in our careers, and so in our real estate career, let's say we deal with level 1. Let's say that they're the folks that are out there. They're working, you know, they're starting off their careers. They maybe haven't invested in real estate yet. You know, this podcast is going to talk a fair bit about real estate.
They're trading their, I think, especially in level bucket 1, a lot of folks in their 20s, maybe early 30s, is they have motivation, they have energy. They have energy to trade. So what is it that they have to barter with, right, with a company? And it's like, I have energy to want to learn, to want to be trained, to go out there and bust through doors, right? I don't have experience, right, per se, but I have the energy to learn and be the best in whatever corporate position that you work for. But whether you're the best burger flipper or you're the best, whatever that is, you have something that you trade, but it's really only you getting up in the morning and busting through doors for that company. And that's kind of your bucket 1. You don't necessarily have any other irons in the fire that are helping to kind of build your wealth, right? You don't necessarily have many investments. You don't have companies. You don't have probably a lot of real estate yet. And you're really just know that for you to make more money, for you to achieve more success, you need to work harder. And usually working harder means working longer. It means, you know, potentially weekends, things like that. So I really think it's important for everyone to understand who you are. Like listening right now, are you in bucket 1? Are you in bucket 2? Because we're going to be able to speak directly to you, but you need to really forensically understand which bucket is. So bucket 1 is definitely someone that has probably the W-2 job.
Yep.
The harder they work, potentially the more money they make, or they're in a salaried position, or maybe not. Maybe they keep bumping their head against that corporate ceiling. But you could still, the harder you work, like in my position, I was in sales. The harder I worked, the more leads I followed up on, the more sales I made, the more money I made because I was in commission only. But it was only based on my efforts. It was only based on the energy of saying, I can remember Friday nights where I'd be there at the office at 9:30 following up with people. And I wore that as like a badge of honor. I was like, man, I'm outworking the next guy. I'm going to outwork those other competitors because I'm here on a Friday night following up, making phone calls, sending out really well put together proposals so they would choose my proposal. So I think that I just want to kind of outline that's kind of bucket 1. And everyone, it's always going to be a little different. Your bucket 1 might be slightly different than mine, but that's kind of how I would look at bucket 1.
So let's go through bucket 1. If you're listening to this right now and you want to kind of see where you are in our understanding of it, you're right. Bucket 1, you're most likely between 20 and 33.
Yeah.
You are busting your chops. You're working. You're doing well in your career because you're listening to this.
You're
podcast.
listening to this, yeah.
So bucket 1, you're out there. You're working hard. You're doing well. Bucket 2, you're a little bit further down your career right now, and you believed that saving, putting your money into a 401k, saving for the future at this point in time, you're probably 33 to 45. You now have a house, you have a wife, you might have 2 kids. And that's a big responsibility.
Right.
That's going to keep you in line for sure.
Yeah.
But in your heart of hearts, you kind of know that you might be in the $250,000 to $450,000 a year category. You're
Sure.
earning good money, but you're putting your money away. You're 42, 43, 44, 45, and you know that your life is passing. You know that it's $250,000 a year. By the time you pay your mortgage, pay all your expenses, and make some investments and pay your taxes and all of that, you can see, quite frankly, that you're itching inside your world, inside your career. You can see younger people in your job. They're staying later in the office. They can work a little bit harder than you. You're really not as engaged, maybe, at the fundamental core product that you're working on. And so you're looking at, and in bucket 2, you're looking at, okay, I need to invest my way out of here.
Yeah.
I need to have an option. And bucket 3 are people who have achieved that. So they're people who they have got to bucket 1. They did well in their jobs. They made some money. and they're in the learning stage. Bucket 2 is almost the desperation stage. It's
Yeah.
like you're doing very well to everyone else on the outside.
Right.
If you're in bucket 2, you're looking good.
You're probably one of the higher earners in your friends group, in your network.
Yes.
And you've probably exceeded past where they're all currently at.
Yeah.
Maybe you have more aspirations.
Yeah.
And one of the quick analogies I want to give is, I grew up playing basketball. And so it would be you had, I think in high school, we had like a 35-second shot clock, right? So they inbound the ball, you're dribbling up the court. You've got all the time in the world to go score. But I feel like bucket 2, there's like 18 seconds left on the shot clock. And you're like, oh shit, wait, how much time is left on oh, we got to go. Like, come on, let's get near, guys. Let's stop just passing back and forth. Like, let's go to try and score this. Now you're starting to have a little more urgency. You're starting to force yourself to understand a little more that, like, guys, we've got to get organized because the shot clock's going to run out if we're not careful. It's not 4 seconds left in the shot clock, but you're looking at the shot clock. I think when you're in bucket 1, you're in your 20s, there is no shot clock because life, you're just going to live forever, right? And
That's right.
so bucket 2, there is a shot clock in your life and you can kind of see it out of your left eye. Maybe you're not looking directly at it, but you can glance at it and know where you're at. And if you are in your part of your life where you're starting to look at the shot clock and being like, am I surrounding myself with the right people? Am I really making the right moves in business? Am I making the right moves in my relationships with my family, with my kids? That is bucket 2 in a nutshell.
No, it's great. I like that analogy, and you're going to hear a lot of analogies
Yeah.
from Clark and I. I love that analogy. Bucket 2 time is becoming way, way, way more concerning to you. It's like you know that you're capable of more, and you realize at this point in time that you need to invest your way out of this,
Right.
and that your 401k, whilst it's doing well, you got $1 million, you got $2 million in your 401k. That's not liberating.
No.
It's just not in today's money. And bucket 3 are people who are out there that have achieved this. They've achieved a certain level of investing, and they've achieved a certain level of career success. They now live life on their own terms, and they're looking back now. They're, to all intents and purposes, they're living on cash flow, and they're not working. Or not that they need to work, and they're working on more of their passion projects. They're working on helping others. They're working on, helping other people out, which this podcast really fundamentally is all about. So what the podcast is about, and what we want to get across as we enter the wrap up phase of episode 1,
Right.
is we understand that we're going to talk to bucket 1. We understand it. We've been through it. I spent 2 decades in bucket 1, like learning how to make money.
Right.
Trying to figure out how to make money on my own terms. Probably working for people. You've got a job, and you have to work because you need to pay the rent. Bucket 2, you're probably married, or you're certainly you got kids, you got big responsibilities either in work or whatnot. You've got some savings. You can see your 401k is well funded and all of that. But in your heart of hearts, you're, like you say, to use your analogy, you're looking at one corner of your eye and say, like, I'm like 40. I've got like 15 years left.
Yeah.
And if I keep on doing what I'm doing, I'm going to get the same result.
Yeah.
And I'm going to have to work till I'm 65, and then I'm going to have to be careful. I'm going to have to carefully manage my funds, and thereafter. And it's an urgency. If you're in bucket 2, and you're ambitious, there's an urgency in your age, right? And then when we look at bucket 3. And I meet people in bucket 3 all the time. They're living life on their own terms, and they still need to educate and motivate themselves every single day. But they have understood fundamentally what burn your boats means. And in order to get from bucket A to bucket B, you're going to have to do some burning.
Yep.
In order to get from bucket B to bucket C, you're going to have to do some burning again. And it's real hard to do some burning when you've got a wife and kids and responsibilities.
Right.
And then when you get into bucket C and you have achieved a great deal of cash flow, monthly cash flow that far exceeds your expenses, and you're living life primarily on your own terms at that point in time, at that point you become an educator.
Right.
You're helping people in bucket A and bucket B. And so the whole purpose, if you're you made it this far in episode 1, the whole purpose of this podcast is to help everybody in bucket 1 get to bucket 2, and to help people who are in bucket 2. They're way more urgent. There are people who come to us, and let's face it, we're in real estate. I've been in real estate for the last 20 years, and I really don't hear from all that many people in bucket 1. the people who reach out to me, the people who are listening to this podcast, the vast majority of you will be in bucket 1.
Right.
However, very few of you will reach out to us. The people who reach out to me, traditionally in my career, are all in bucket 2.
Right.
They can feel it, their urgency. They're 41, 42. They're married. They have fully funded 401ks.
Right.
They're doing okay, and they realize it's not enough.
Well, they're looking at the shot clock, and it's forcing them to potentially burn their boats because they know that time is now present. Time is now a thing.
That's right.
Bucket 1, time is just, I'll figure it out sometime in the future, and they don't realize how quickly that future is going to become the present. And that's the exciting thing. And I really think our mission here is to be able to give confidence, give ideas, to be able to make that jump, to burn that resume, to throw it in the garbage can, but to do it in a tactful way, where you can set yourself up so you're not just taking a risk. You're really minimizing that risk, and that's very exciting. And it's exciting for me, and I know, David, it's exciting for you to be able to sit here and be in a position where we have the ability to know that it's time to maybe burn our boats again, and this is part of it, and this is just fun. For me, this is just super. Ironically enough, I was telling you is that I got my degree in broadcasting. Ironically enough, and I know that the minute I walked out of that college, that broadcasting school, I knew I was never going to be in broadcasting. I just felt it. I knew that I wanted to be in more of a financial sales kind of area. I didn't know quite where yet. But I knew that, sitting behind a camera and editing was just not my purpose. And ironically, we sit right here in front of the camera, and you can see how life comes full circle. So
yeah. So if you've made it this far, thanks for listening to us. What we're going to do, from on a weekly basis from here on out, is we're going to sit down and we're going to talk to bucket A. If you're in bucket A, we're going to create some urgency in your world. We're going to give you some clarity. If you're in bucket B, we're really going to help you.
Yeah.
We're really going to talk about how the actionable tips that you can take that are going to create that urgency in your mind, and the courage it takes to make change in your life, because it takes a lot of courage.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people out there, there's a lot of information out there, there's a lot of podcasts out there, there's a lot of books, there's a lot of tips. But sometimes all of this is overload. And so this podcast is coming from people who have burned their boats many, many, many times. And, we're good at it.
Yeah.
We're good at burning our boats and just making decisions and being decisive and making those things happen. And so if you are in bucket A, if you're in bucket B, we think we're going to add a lot of value. And if you're in bucket C, just enjoy it. I think you'll enjoy saying yes or no, or, I agree with what the guys are saying or not. But for today, let's wrap it up.
Yeah.
Episode 1, thanks for joining us. If you've made it this far, we're going to add value every single week. If you're in bucket 1, we're really going to lean in and talk to you and create some urgency in your world, and know that understand that we're going to give you information. I'm older. I'm 52. You're 40, and so we're gonna play roles here. It's like you're gonna play that that more inquisitive mind, and I think I'm going to play the more elderly statesman role here and say, well, have you thought about it this way? Have you thought about it that way? So we hope to bring actionable value in every one of these podcasts for the next couple of weeks. And for today, let's wrap it up. Thanks for getting this far. And
yeah, we appreciate you sticking with us and listening to our banter, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
You've been listening to the Burn Your Boats podcast with Clark Lunt and David Shaw. We would love to hear from you. Please reach out at burnyourboatswealth.com with comments, questions, and if you have a topic you would like Clark and David to discuss on an upcoming episode. We would very much appreciate it if you took the time to rate and review Burn Your Boats podcast on your favorite podcast listening app, and make sure to follow and share on social media. Content in Burn Your Boats podcast is for entertainment purposes only and is not legal or financial advice. Please review our legal disclaimer at burnyourboatswealth.com. Thank you for listening.